Right, we'll make a start. I'm conscious there's only 3. I'm not quite sure why we're losing people on these. So I've got a PowerPoint, but given there's only 3 and Amy's here as well, what I suggest we do is run through some of the stuff I've got, but let's perhaps turn it a little bit more into a conversation with you, and you can throw stuff back at us. What I'd like to try and do is also, perhaps if you were at the first presentation this morning, is I got away at lunchtime and thought about how I can embed some of those comments from the SU in, which I think are really, really important. So I've got some Padlet, but I think we might just be able to discuss it, and I can take some notes, which we can circulate. So this is a beginner's guide in terms of, I think we're all still beginners in this process in many ways. So what I thought we could do for the next hour is just really make sure that you are, if you're starting or still trying to get your head around what we're doing, what does it all mean in terms of what does blended mean and what does connected mean? It was quite interesting actually having asked the SU that question this morning. The students don't know and they're putting more emphasis on the connected. So it's just really important to understand you're kind of like on the journey with us so you can share our aspiration of what we're trying to do, and then perhaps talk about what does it actually mean when you start actually designing modules or trying to translate the stuff that you've done prior to COVID over into this COVID environment. And that's what for me, I think that it's not about reinventing the wheel, but it's about translating stuff that you've done already over in the best possible way for the student experience. So we can talk about that. And one of the things I am going to draw out from it, and you're all welcome to chip in, for me, it's still very much centered around the idea of kind of like active blended learning and what that actually means. So if that is all right with everybody, there's only a small group. So instead of necessarily using the chat, which you're welcome to do, please feel free to just unmute and just chip in as we go along. That's probably the nicer way of doing it. So the story for this, if we go right back to lockdown, was we had to come up with some principles for what blended and connected learning means. And that was quite an informed process at the beginning, and we did it quite strategically. And we pulled in a lot of reference points from other universities. So we came up with the 4. So the headline indicators are, these are the 4 principles in which the university is placing kind of like blended and connected learning around. So pedagogically led, flexible, responsive, supported by active blended learning, inclusive and supportive, staff and student partnerships, and aspirational. Okay, so in the chat, actually on this one, and we're really getting, actually, should we do it on? Yeah, let's do it in the chat because it says opening up a Menti and taking you somewhere else. We'll save that for someone else. It's all well and good us putting this on the screen. What I'd like you to kick off with is, from your perception at the moment, whether you're new or you've been playing around with it, what does this actually mean to you? How are you interpreting this in terms of how you're designing and how you're delivering? So just a comment in the chat, and then we can invite people to comment on what you're thinking. Does it resonate with you, and how are you interpreting this in terms of your own approach to learning and teaching? Does it resonate, actually? Is the chat working?
I think we're all I think we're all being silent, Andy.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you just want to put something in that just drops it or open up? Let's do it the other way around. Let's do it this way. So, Tony, as you chipped in,
yeah,
what does it mean to you?
I'm not sure really. Inclusive and supportive, fine. Staff and student partnership centered. Yeah, I think everything should be student centered. Pedagogy led. I'm not. Well, I suppose yes, I understand. Led by sort of teaching practice, flexible and responsive. Absolutely, I can understand that. So it's responding to sort of wants and needs, and aspirational. I mean, I'm not quite sure exactly how I would sort of put a tag on that. Am I being very thick here?
No, not at all, because I think everybody's interpreting in this different way. So let's just go round before we kind of like, let's do the hat and everybody gets a chance. So Veronica, would you like to, what does this all mean for you at the moment? How have you interpreted? And
Along similar lines as Tony, and I think I did mention in previous discussions that of where I work at RF, one of the RF bases, it's what we do now, all the blending learning and methods that are on the VLE are mostly pushed through by the RF rather than us. So I would not necessarily say that this is pedagogically led, more like RF led than anything else. But I do completely agree that the blending learning needs to be inclusive and supportive, and especially for us, it's very important because we have students with different kinds of educational background, people who have PhDs, people who have masters, undergraduate, people who only have A levels. So what we do have on the VLE and the consultation sessions that are either online or in person, they really need to be inclusive, and the materials need to be they need to be accessible to everyone, regardless of their educational background.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Zoe, hiya.
Hello.
Zoe, what does this mean to you on reflection? You've been engaging it. What's it meant to you, or what's it still meaning to you in terms of how you've developed your approach to learning and teaching?
Well, I think I'm probably coming at this from a slightly different perspective. I'm the OD manager at the university, so my job is teaching staff rather than students. I am trying to grapple with how we turn a very successful 3-day leadership and management program into a virtual blended and connected learning environment. So for me, it's I'm trying to work out how we redesign our content for a very different way of teaching. And I thought your session might have some information on that, Andy.
Oh, I hope so. I know what's coming, so I think I can safely say yes on that with a bit of luck. Harold, are you still here? By default, Harold, you wanted to be somewhere else. Yes. How can we get you somewhere else? If I asked Amy nicely, she might be able to text Sarah, our administrator. Would that say, Amy, would that be all right as I carry on? Fantastic.
Yes, please. Please
brilliant.
do.
Okay, Howard, we'll get
you.
You're welcome. Okay, so you're all right, and this is the challenge. It's such an in many ways, blended and connected learning is quite ambiguous, but it comes back to the two things. What does blended mean, and what does connected mean? And there isn't a right or wrong answer. So I'm just going to perhaps take you through. When I talk about blended connected learning, and what I'll try and signpost is, for me, this goes back. This isn't new. This goes back to what we were doing in. My first job was a learning and teaching technologist in '92. And, you know, there's my relics of that was probably my first academic textbook, How to Write Flexible Learning Materials. And it's still the same kind of premise about developing a range of different type of flexible learning materials that are fit for purpose, that reflect. And this is kind of like one of the sessions that we do that kind of like links back to that, because it's almost like we've gone back to the future, but back again, because this isn't new. We've been discussing this a long time. And I'm just going to quote here. This is from, so you all realize that now that Ali's actually joined us at the university, but Ali was a real proponent of active blended learning at Northampton. And, you know, if you've not seen his presentation at the Blended Learning Summer Festival, go and watch it, because it puts in context what we're actually trying to do. But active blended learning is about structuring experiences for students through a range of different types of activities, and being active within that. One of the takeaways from the SU presentation this morning was that perhaps some of our students are still the material is being delivered and they're not actively engaging in the process. So how do we overcome those types of challenges? But it's about creating all sorts of different opportunities, but on an individual basis. It's not saying that there is one size for me that fits all. And I think the other comment this morning was, oh, this blended learning framework trims my ability to be creative. It doesn't at all. If anything, it facilitates creativity, because it's about you reflecting on what your own pedagogy is and the types of tools that you want to develop to support that and approaches, and creating your own blend. That's what it's all about. It's your own approach to learning and teaching. So if you imagine it, we've got X 100,000, 1,000 staff at the university. Everybody has their own blend, but collectively, Portsmouth then has its own blend, and it ultimately should be supporting TEF. So everything, enhancing the student experience, but it creates a point of difference for our students in terms of what they're actually trying to do. Sorry, I sound like a marketeer when I go on like that. But the way of thinking it, and something I've always tried to do, is that think about active blended learning as a spectrum of opportunity. So at one end of the scale, we have traditional face-to-face delivery, let's call it pre-COVID. But even pre-COVID, we were doing the online stuff. So this is where we're at. This is the kind of environment you're at, can actually thinking. And what we're trying to do on this spectrum is find a spot where you fit in terms of what you're actually trying to do. So an interesting publication here from the Commonwealth of Learning was this notion of what we're actually trying to think about is the intensity of the blend that we want to create for the students. So, and again, it's where you fit. So face-to-face delivery, different methods, and then full online, or as Ali would put it, kind of like active distance learning is, well, what do you actually want it to look like? Okay. And what's happened over COVID is that, look at that, we've shifted to the right. We have kind of like gone into this active blended learning domain quite quickly. And we're having to rethink what we're doing, but not necessarily at the expense of what we were doing beforehand. It's quite interesting talking to colleagues recently about their fellowship claims. And they're kind of like going, oh, is it all got to be COVID related? And what you've got to remember is that you were teaching long before COVID. We were doing it. We were delivering high quality experience. It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about translating what we were doing at one end of the spectrum and possibly moving to the other end, but finding your space in that to do it. And when we're going through that design process, we need to think about things like, well, the degree of synchronicity. Are we doing asynchronous, synchronous, where, when, how, what's it actually gonna look like? How does that fit to constructive alignment? So how do we create valid delivery instruments or forms of assessment that are going to help meet the learning outcomes of the module? What does blended learning look like for a first year compared to a second year, compared to a third year student? What does it look like for postgraduates? Because it will be different, reflecting their levels of expertise and their awareness of actually how to be effective learners online. How do we embed EDI into that as well, to make sure that these kind of like blended learning experiences are equitable and accessible for everybody? And how do we engage the students in that kind of like process in terms of actually getting the feedback? And I think the first session this morning really highlighted the importance of actually doing that, because sometimes we make assumptions about what we need to deliver, thinking that's what the students want, but it's not necessarily what they want. And if we had those conversations early on, we'd probably rethink perhaps some of the decisions that we're making. Okay. Eddie, I'm going to go here and then I'm going to. So why on a Wednesday afternoon have I put a slide up that is full of pick and mix? Zoe, what's the relevance of that, do you think? Can you offer a suggestion?
Mixing it all up, making sure you've got bits of different things. You've got your tangy, tasty bits there, and your chewable bits, and tapping into all of the different learning needs and preferences. Yeah,
and sorry, the closest I get, and I was going to keep them, but I ate them, sorry. But it's a bit like, here's your box of Quality Street, and you go in and it's all mixed up, but each one of these suites represents a different tool or pedagogy that you're using. And it's about creating a really nice blend of those over the course of 12 weeks or across the course of your module that fit with the students. But interestingly, a quote from Emma Winter in marketing was, I like I like pink shrimps, but I wouldn't want to eat them all the time. So it's about varying the diet, if you like, for the students in terms of that you are deploying different technologies or different approaches depending on the learning outcomes and what you're actually trying to do in a session. And actually, the kind of like the digital fabric is what holds it all together to actually help actually deliver it. Does that kind of, I thought that I've always done it as a pick and mix, but it's almost like creating your own coffee blend. What strength would you like? And again, going back to that, there is no right answer where you appear on that spectrum of opportunity, because it's about you in this blended and connected learning arena, finding a place that you are comfortable with. It's not us saying they must do it. Like, we're setting a framework, we're setting an aspiration of, it would be great if you could do this. And if you've been to some of the sessions today, you'll see that people are doing it. And a lot of it is, it's so simple in terms of what they've done. But if it was like a business and you were considering the rate of investment on what they've done, for the students, it's actually been quite transformative because it's really engaging. And I think in some cases, actually better than what the students were getting last year as well, because we've started people critically thinking about that delivery. Okay. So within that kind of context, that's where we're trying to get our principles around this blended, connected vision to actually sit, for me, alongside that spectrum of opportunity. Okay. Right. I've been talking far too long. Anybody like to chip in? Does that make sense, or is it nonsense, or how are you actually seeing that? Tony, what do you think? Where would you fit, Tony? What are you enjoying at the moment in terms of creating your blend?
Well, I teach distance learners, so
yeah,
you could say that the impression I get is everyone else is sort of coming around to our sort of way of doing things. But what I would say is that in my department, I don't feel that we're particularly well supported technologically. So I find that I'm sort of increasing my methods of delivering lectures, and I've also acquired some part-time students on courses as well as distance learners. So it's a case of adapting to what would have previously been a classroom session with probably 1, 2, possibly 3 students to using things like Zoom. It's quite finding it quite challenging, in fact.
In what ways are you finding it challenging, Tony? What's the hurdle you've struggled with a little bit, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, no. I found, for example, I had to give a fairly lengthy about an hour's lecture to I thought to one student, and I'd actually prepared quite well for that student. Had other people sort of turned up, and I was talking to a colleague at Warwick University who experienced the same thing. The first thing was, can people hear me? Second thing was that there wasn't any sort of reply from the people I thought were online, and thirdly, when I included things like video clips, they didn't work. They couldn't hear them. So I thought the whole thing was a bit of a failure, really. But made worse by the fact it's recorded. However, having played it back and edited it, it's actually some very good sessions, which we're going to keep.
Excellent.
And yeah. But no, I mean, it's all a bit new to me. I suppose talking about blended and connected learning, I think I sort of had an idea of what it was, but putting definitions to the terms actually is very, very useful to me today. Making me think a little bit more around it, and perhaps think about how I can sort of do better what I'm doing already.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because I'm just rereading again the wording behind each of the principles this morning, and in my head thinking back to what the SU was saying, and there's a gap, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Veronica, any comment on that? What characterizes your blend at the moment?
So I think that that the team that I am a part of at RM Holton, we are somewhere halfway through. somewhere in between face-to-face and fully online learning, and my colleagues in Cranwell, RF Cranwell, are at the fully online learning stage. I would actually, now that you mentioned the morning session and the feedback from the students, union students, I think that some of the issues for us are related to too much content online. I think that students, they do their online preparation online, and they go through all the materials, which I think are quite good. But it can be quite overwhelming seeing so many materials online and not actually having enough time to go through them. Which I think it's a problem for us at RM Holton and RF Cranwell, that we develop a very good course with nine modules. Each module is meant to take up to 4 hours of students' time, but actually it does take much more, and it's quite overwhelming for the students. So I think that's our main issue there.
Zoe, what about yourself?
I think for us, where it's staff that we're talking about, it was interesting that Veronica was saying somewhere in the middle. I think for us, we've got less flexibility with that, because the majority, well, I don't know the actual figures, but a lot of staff aren't on campus. And we've been told that we're not allowed to go on campus because we're not front-facing teaching, etc. So I feel for us, it's a massive leapfrog from going from a really good, robust leader and manager as coach program, is the one that I'm going to use an example, teaching that face-to-face to our staff, to actually, we need to go fully online with that because we're not allowed on campus. Yeah. So I guess for me, it's like, how can I include some blended? So obviously the asynchronous and just finding our feet. It's interesting. Was it Tony that said the lack of support? We're really finding that. Obviously, we're a university, we're there to teach students, but we are trying so hard to get technical support for us to move in that direction. And I know it's a challenge for everybody, but I wonder at university level, we need to look at that gap in the expertise now that this is the way that we're going. And it gets me thinking about digital skills for our staff. So Tony mentioned, he's had to learn new things. Well, so have we in learning and development. We've had to learn how to use Zoom. We've had to learn how to use webinar, WebEx webinar, because we've got our virtual staff induction conference coming up for 300 staff in a couple of weeks. Well, that's taken so much time for us to self-directed learning, to really learn that. So I wonder at an organizational level if there's some kind of digital competencies framework that we need to look at upskilling our staff.
Absolutely.
Because if I could sort of just add to what I was saying earlier, a problem I've had is in that trying to prepare teaching materials to give to several people as opposed to one-to-one, because I found working with students one-to-one was very effective, and especially as they all my students coming from different backgrounds, different perspectives. Many of them speak different languages, so there are sort of cultural differences. That's where diversity sort of comes into it. But it's very galling sometimes to spend hours and hours and hours preparing something, mode of delivery, and finding, well, actually no one turns up, or one person turns up. So I think to myself, perhaps what I was doing on a one-to-one basis previously was actually worked better than what I'm doing now. And other things suffer. It extends the working day.
This is the challenge that I think. And Zoe, I think we'd be happy. I've been talking to Cass about the Delivering Excellence program, because that's got to go. But, if you want to come and have a chat, we're here to help you plan it. And I'll point to some planning materials later on. But one of the things that when you start doing this blend, there is some of the questions we asked CSU today is, what is the right level of blend? Because people are stuffing their sessions so full of different activities because there's an expectation that they have to cover so much ground, and sometimes less is more to have the impact. And it's where you achieve that. What is the best balance in a particular session? And it's interesting looking at the screen. It's what I take away from the SU feedback today was we're missing a couple of words here. One is around that, there needs to be a massive dotted line around the entirety of that now that says community, because we've missed community out in the small print, I think, somewhere. And also communication, because it's all great, but the message from the SU this morning was if you're not communicating it and there isn't clarity around what you're doing, we can't engage because we're not with you. So I think there's some really important kind of like takeaways from that session this morning that we need to build in quite creatively into how we actually take this forward. Oh, I'm going to do it. Come on, it's a workshop on blended connected learning, and it wouldn't be right if I didn't ask you to do something a little bit interactive. So if you've got access to a web browser or your phone, what I'd like you to do, and I set it this morning so it should still be working, is if you go to that URL, so polev.com, and then / Andy Clegg 549. Hopefully that's working. If not, I'll go and reset it. Agree. Right. So what you'll see on your screen is a list of attributes of what active blended learning is, and they're not in any particular order. And this actually comes from some work that Ali did at Northampton about setting out a context for what ABL is and is not. So the way the poll everywhere works is if you just press on one of the options, you can move the option up and down. And what I'd like you to have a go at doing is, we're not going to put the 11 in order, but what I'd like you to do, and this is your perception of what ABL is, can you identify your top 5? And then what will happen, it'll just move them around and we can see what everybody is thinking about the underpinning principles or characteristics of an ABL module. What should it reflect? And I will just try and pull that up so we can see the results. Right, let me just go there and I'll share that. Desktop one. Actually, no, let's do Chrome. Okay. So a couple of minutes, there's no rush. And hopefully you can see that on the screen. And you can see the results. It'll move around as you submit your entries. So we see what is it the most important thing that you're putting in. I'm going to do as well. So let's just make sure that's working. Right, I want that one to be. Right, how many responses do you put in? So you just let me know when you've submitted, and then we can see how it's coming out. Right, Zoe, have you submitted?
Yes, I did a
Brilliant.
thumbs up.
Amy's done. Veronica, have you submitted?
Yes.
Lovely. Tony?
Yeah, I submitted, but sorry, I actually
that's
only
okay,
only
you.
did the first three, but
That's okay. No, that's
yeah.
fine. Mohammed, are you okay?
Yes, submitted.
Brilliant. So, okay. So if you can see the screen, this is the final result. So we've all kind of like gone for the, because I did it as well, for the learner-centered interactions based. What I'm really pleased about is that you've picked the second one, or the second one you've gone for team approach to design. If Ali was here, he would have put that's where he goes kind of like first, because you cannot do ABL in isolation. There needs to be a team approach, not just to sound out what you're doing, but also to make sure that there's a consistency of the blend across a degree. So for example, if I'm working in isolation and doing lots of Padlet related stuff, and my colleague's doing another module and doing exactly the same, and the student happens to take both modules, their diet isn't going to be very varied. They're going to get the same thing, which for them might be quite bland. So it's collectively working as a team to map out what that ABL landscape looks like across a program. And then the broader recognition there that active blended learning is the new normal. Students build their own knowledge. And then the other important one here, I think, is the students are given the scaffolding to create that knowledge through the type of activities that we are creating for them. Okay, so I can screenshot that and I can circulate that round after, so you've got a record of that. But if I just go back to my PowerPoint, this is, and again, this is kind of like Ali's kind of like where he comes from. So what are we trying to do? So it's active, has a large element of collaboration. And so one of the workshops this afternoon was about how do we effectively create that collaboration online? How do we create those communities so the students want to work together and feel motivated in their learning? Content is not king, it's the context. The scaffolding around that types of activities, but the effectiveness of the planning very early on to prevent design failure later on. And that's where that collaborative thinking comes in early, that if you can get groups and work with colleagues to be quite creative and innovative in terms of what you want to do, and almost, you know, be prepared to take a risk with this and accept that it, I know it sounds really, but to accept that it might fail. I know that sounds a really daft thing to say, but if you've got the students on board and it doesn't quite work, as long as they know what you're trying to do, I've always felt that students are quite receptive to that because you're trying to make a difference. But it's interesting. This is from what ABL is not, and it was quite a worry this morning, perhaps listening to the SU, was ABL is not non-interactive lectures. And I do worry that perhaps as a result of COVID, our first reaction has been voice over PowerPoints. And students have had voice over PowerPoint, and it's got to go kind of like beyond that to actually get that level of engagement. Whereas the VLE Moodle goes beyond the repository of content, but provides this, what's the best word? The platform for engagement. And I think we've done quite well with that around the way that we've actually used the Moodle template to help structure activities and give students the navigation around what we need them to do. But online activity is not merely being a bolt-on. They've got to be scaffolded into what you're actually trying to do to facilitate the enhancement and the engagement for the students. Okay, and there's no systematic evidence of enhancement. We need to see it working. How do you know? One of the things I've been trying to get everybody to think about from the early on with this is blended and connected learning. What does connected mean? So connected is about communication for me, clarity, but always having that constant dialogue with the students to make sure what you're doing is working. So if you've given them it's about, here's a cup of coffee, it's my own blend, did you like it? Well, not quite, Andy, it was a bit strong. Why? Because you rushed through the activities. There was too much for us to do and we couldn't do it in the time that you wanted. Okay, how would you change it if you were me? Or if you took those two activities out and focused on that it would be so much easier for us to understand what you're actually trying to do. So be confident enough to have those conversations with the students about the types of things that you're trying to do. One of the best examples we've seen today was, a very simple thing, but just have at the beginning of each session, do a very short video about, hey guys, this is how this session is going to work this week. We're going to have a bit of fun, but this is what I need you to do. This is the outcome of the session, and this is what I'm going to need you to focus on. This is what you need to try and get from it, and how it's then going to relate to the other session. So don't be afraid to create that relationship, because all this sounds lovely. I can give you loads of diagrams of what ABL looks like, but actually, let me ask a trick question perhaps. What's the most important thing the students want in all of this that we often forget, I think, at the moment? Anybody? Zoe? Oh, sorry, Tony.
Well, I say they want a good degree.
Yes, absolutely.
That's what they're here for.
But be more specific, Tony. What do they really want at the end of the day, you think?
Well, so going back, so I suppose we're looking for psychological aspects. I can either be outcome orientated, so looking for the result, achieving the objective, or they could be task orientated, so enjoying what they're doing. So I think probably a mixture of the two.
Yeah.
If that answer is not too vague.
No, we do vague today. It's fine. Zoe, what do you think they want? Veronica, what do you think they want? And Mohammed, what would you say? Because I can show you loads of graphs and diagrams, and
you've got some answers in the chat, Andy. I don't know if you can see
sorry,
it.
I missed me. Where's the chat? Let's have a look. So we got, where are we? To be engaged to discuss ideas, to pass assessments, to be inspired, to learn. Okay. Who's inspiring them?
You.
Yeah, there's the answer to the question. All they want is you. I think a lot of the time we forget that. And it for me, it comes back that to be motivated, to be engaged. And remember, under the COVID, they are like a service-based organization that delivers online, in my head. And all they want is they want to know you're at the other end and that you're there for them. And it's about how you create that relationship online. And it might be that, you do it through lots of little videos that talk to them. Imagine those kind of assessment conversations that you have in a session. You capture those in a video and you put them online to begin with. It might be that every afternoon, or perhaps once a week, you have a drop-in afternoon tea session. So you about what it is that they want. And for me, it's all of this. It's about you and how you capture your kind of like personality online to engage them, to make sure that they feel like they're part of a okay. But again, how we do that is down to the individual, because there is no right or wrong answer to do it. But what we are trying to do through these different activities and through this scaffolded learning is to perhaps think of it in terms of blended and connected, right? The kind of things that I want them to do prior to the session to prepare them, the types of things that we're going to do during the session, and the type of things I want them to do afterwards to strengthen all these different aspects of knowledge. And then if I kind of like then go to, and again, I apologize, I nicked this from Ali's presentation that he did last summer, but it's, if you think about the journey the students are going on, how we expose them to information. So we start on the left-hand side, and how we're facilitating that discussion in or outside the classroom, or in groups or individually. And the notion around these kind of like, for me, it's the second box, the idea of these sense-making activities and how we're designing these and structuring them to really create the engagement and the understanding. We're then bringing them back. How do we generate the discussion? And then again, how do we create that consolidation of their learning? Again, synchronously, asynchronously, individuals or in teams. And it's this notion here of the scaffolded approach at the beginning of this journey, and then linking it to the nature of the activities that we're actually trying to create that actually goes with it, and finding that right balance and blend, that it's, again, going back to the key things like constructive alignment, that it's supporting the delivery of your learning outcomes, and it's facilitating clear guidance around assessment and what you're actually asking the students to do. If you've not read it, one of the other things I'd get you all to go and look at is the Advanced HE framework for flexible learning, because for me, this is where it starts overlapping a little bit. And in my head, I'm kind of like thinking we're creating what I would class as a fable or a flexible active blended learning experience, that it captures this notion of flexibility. It's about the different realms. But related to that, and another document I would suggest you could read, and again, I'm very happy to send all this around as a little care package, is, if you've not read it, Flexible Pedagogies by Neil Gordon. And this is a really, it was published in 2014, but it could have been published last week because it still has immediate relevance to what we're doing. And the most important element for me is this diagram that's on the screen now about the spaces that we create for student learning and the relationship between the mode of delivery, the pace of delivery, and the place of delivery. And at the moment, that's what we're discussing. Every time we talk about a blend and how it's being developed and designed, they are the three, for me, the key components that we are really thinking about in terms of how we achieve that level of student engagement. The challenge we have, and this is like, oh my Lord, is that we can sit here and go, okay, and you all of a sudden are exposed to this kind of environment where there is a myriad of different types of technologies that you go, oh my Lord, where do we start? When we did the festival in the summer, we did some feedback. 75% of the colleagues that responded to this, so we had about 100 people respond, 75% said we found the conference really helpful. It gave us the motivation to go and actually have a go. 20% said we're not sure what to do next. And I think because for many, it's quite overwhelming in terms of the kind of technologies to use. What is the best bit of technology to use in the right place that's going to have the maximum impact? So you do end up with a situation like this, but very simply, as you start this process, all I would say is think about these as different types of ingredients and just ask the question, where to start? Well, what are you trying to make? If you're trying to make a Victoria sponge cake, you need a certain set of ingredients. If you're trying to make chocolate brownies, you need a different set of ingredients. So your starting point, and perhaps Zoe at the beginning, when you start thinking about the development stuff you're trying to do, perhaps go through the types of things that you're doing at the moment and ask yourself, what would translate online really easily? What could we do to generate the same type of discussion? And perhaps use that as your starting point. And then think about, right, these other bits are a little bit more complicated. How could we craft those as perhaps something that's a little bit more self-directed? So it's not about chucking out the stuff that you've done. It's almost looking at each week, each exercise that you do and saying, can we put that online? Yes or no? Yes, we will do this. No. Okay, we need to find an alternative. But use that discussion and have that discussion as a team. So you get that different perspective on what it is you're actually trying to do. One of the things within the framework is, again, it's the constructive alignment. So you're picking the right ingredients to facilitate that structure. But also, you don't have to use everything. So what we've tried to do from kind of like coming in afresh is Moodle is at the heart of what we're doing. But we have Nearpod, Padlet, and Vivox as perhaps your core ingredients. It's a bit like reading the Delia Smith book. Here are the things that you need to have in your larder to be able to come up with all sorts of it. They are your staples to start with. They will give you a lot. Padlet is like a box of it. You can create so many different recipes with Padlet. You're fine. What we're getting from the students is that they don't like to be overloaded with too many different types of technology. They find it too confusing. So it's about perhaps limiting that range. But at the same time, what we're not trying to do is stifle people's creativity. Okay, so it does provide a vehicle for perhaps drawing in other types of technology around that, whether you're using H5P or Kahoot, Mentimeter, Poll Everywhere. You know, it's about facilitating a structure to get some consistency, but also facilitating a platform where if you want to be a little bit more creative, you can be, with the support of Act Dev and Tail behind the scenes, if you like, to really give you the confidence that you can start being a bit more engaged and a bit more creative in terms of what you'd like to have a go at doing. And again, just to kind of like point you in that direction, if you've not seen these, and again, I'll send the PowerPoint around, these are all embedded links. We've created a set of Moodle resources that talk you through these principles in some detail. It's a really good starting point. The other thing that we've done in that, one of my activities, and this is a planning tool, Zoe, so it'd be interesting to see if you'd like to have a go at doing this, and perhaps we could facilitate it, but it's a workshop activity that I came up with based around L'Oreal's ABC learning design around 6 areas of activity. And we've come up with some sheets. It's expanded on what they actually developed, but there is a PowerPoint planning tool that I can send you over. And basically, as a team, you think about the kind of activities that you want to do, and the PowerPoint allows you to start actually planning out those activities. So I would be really happy to try and facilitate that workshop for you if you wanted to, Zoe, and we could see it in action. It might work. It'd be great to have a go. And also I can send round, there's some additional planning sheets to facilitate that kind of discussion around that toolkit. So over the summer, we spent a lot of time developing lots of resources to help facilitate the transition over. And there's also all the resources that were produced by the TEL team around preparing for blended learning. And also more recently, all the resources around the content capture and using Panopto effectively around that as well. So I covered a lot of ground there. I think if I was to, for me, it's also, to summarize this in many ways, you can only do what you can do, and it's not about necessarily trying to do everything. It's trying to find a really effective starting point with something that you are interested in, that you have confidence, and then having a go at doing that, reflecting, coming back and having another go, and just drip by drip by drip, enhancing your practice around the blended and connected learning approach. But like I said at the beginning, there is no right or wrong answer. The university's tried to provide a framework to give you that sense of direction. How you map your own journey within that and how you develop your own blend is entirely down to you, working with colleagues, but also working with us, because we're here to help you kind of like visualize the kind of endpoint that you'd like to try and get to. Amy, is there anything you'd add to that from the experiences that we've had so far?
Only to say that, which is a point you've already made, kind of less is more. So if you're coming to this sort of quite new, and also sort of Zoe, thinking with your translation, it really is, it's maybe 3 core tools. And then if you were looking at a kind of curriculum, you might swap one of those out a couple of times. But I think the pressure is to feel like there's got to be so much in terms of content, and it really doesn't need to be. It just needs to be well scaffolded, and as Andy says, kind of communicated throughout. I think we've really underestimated how much the students needed. This week you need to do X, then do X, then find this here, and when you've done that, you can come to the it's really sort of step-by-step instructions. And I think we felt that, if that was structured in Moodle, they would just naturally understand that progression. I think we heard from the students that were there this morning that that's not the case.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd add to that very quickly is that when we all start, everybody's been trying to strive for perfection, that they do a video. It took me 15 goes to get the video right because things kept going wrong, or it wasn't to the right quality. And the message that came from the SU at the summer event was, don't worry about it. Because, if you made an error, if you sneezed or something, there was a mishap in a you just carry on. So I would just say, be human. That's where the relationship comes through, and don't strive for perfection, because in many ways the students aren't expecting it as such. They want good quality. We want high quality, but we're not here judging everybody's videos as if we're, going to be handing out Oscars kind of thing. It's what you can do. And I think that's the most important thing, is have a go, try and be consistent in your approach, and try to drive for that level of quality. And if you're not quite sure how to get there, that's where the ACTDev and the TAL teams are here to kind of like support you and be a critical friend in that process to give you some really sensible tips on the types of things that you can actually be doing. And if you've not got to all the sessions today, please come back and have a look. You know, Karen Ann's session this morning on her use of Padlet was amazing. Sean's one on H5P, equally, you know, they're early adopters. They started this at the beginning, but what they're doing now is just absolutely amazing. It's brilliant. And you can learn, please just learn and have a look and have a go. And we're here to help.
Yeah, echo the same for Matt Parker's session, where he, as you said, Andy, sort of walked through what he does stage by stage for a week. And it was more of the sort of granular detail rather than kind of the overarching sort of framework of building the kind of the blend and the activities. It was very specific detail, quite practical. So I'd recommend that as well.
It does take me back to my days when I was working at Gloucester, and we were doing all this stuff online, but we were producing workbooks that the students, you know, God, I've got my name on several acres in the tropical rainforest somewhere with the amount of paper that we use, but each student had a workbook. And I think the lesson in those workbooks was those workbooks were very granular. They were step 1, step 2, step 3, because the students didn't have online access. It all had to be self-contained. And I think the lesson there is that almost sometimes the challenge is also when we're getting students to do stuff online, they're not necessarily taking notes locally. And it's almost like, well, what are the students going to be left with at the end of the session that they can come back to? So one of the other things is, you know, what support materials are you giving them? And I can circulate one that I did yesterday for a session I ran where I created an interactive PDF, but it had all the links in it. It had notes, learning outcomes and everything, but it was used in conjunction with the session. So the learners had an artifact at the end, which was a record of what they did, which I think is also quite important as well. Is that everybody? Is that giving everybody a little bit of confidence to go forward? Hope so. Mohammed, is that all right with you? Is that helped? Excellent, thumbs up. Simple as that. That's all right.
Yes.
Tony, is that
Yes,
helped
it has.
a
Thank
bit?
you.
I think
Sorry,
Tony,
is that...
Tony, is that all right with you?
Sorry, still here. I'm just lost my cursor somewhere between the two screens. No, very informative. The first session I've managed to get to today. I take it the other sessions will be available as recordings. Is that right?
They will be, Tony. Yeah,
I thought so. Yeah.
Give us to the beginning of next week, and they will be up and available. Yeah.
But very. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Tony. I thought you...
No, just say very grateful for your session today, Andy. Very informative. Thank you.
Veronica, are you okay?
Yeah, absolutely good. Thank you very much for delivering the session.
Cool. Zoe, you got some ideas?
Loads.
Brilliant. So, Veronica, did I cut you off? I apologise if I did. You got something else to...
No, that was it.
Excellent. Okay. No, but also...
Some requests in the chat for sharing the slides, Andy. Are you happy to do that?
Yes, I will. We'll make sure that you get a care package at the end, and all the slides will also be on the website so you can download them. And just a final invitation, we're running another... Well, we're going to be running these mini fests for the foreseeable. If you're doing something and you'd like to share, there is an event pro forma on the webpage. Fill it in, send it in. We would, at the next event, I think the Act Dev and the TAIL team would very much like not to have to present anything. And we just let other colleagues run have the entire day to themselves without us having to put anything in. So please share your practice. No matter how small you think it might be, somebody will take something from it that will make a difference to them, I promise. Okay. Right, guys, thanks very much for coming. We really appreciate it. And like I said, we're here to help. So don't hesitate in reaching out if you need anything.